Hi everybody, it's Michael and I'm back with one of my walkthrough videos, and today I want to show you the Palaces of Carrara, or Die Paläste von Carrara. The game is by Wolfgang Kramer and Kiesling, a very famous duo of authors which have won numerous prizes both together and I think each one of their own, Kramer at least, but I also think Kiesling. This game is nominated for the Kennerspiel des Jahres along with Bruges and Legends of Andor. Well, it came out in 2012. It's for 2 to 4 players, ages 10 and up. It takes about 60 minutes to play. What I have here is the German version from Glück. It's not really language independent because you have these cards where the endgame conditions are written down. There are also icons, and since all these cards are open and public information and you only have 4 of them in any given game, I think it should be possible with paste ups or a cheat sheet to actually play this game, even if you don't speak German at all. And Siemens Games has put out an English version, I think in a very small print run last year when this came out in Essen, and I think they plan a larger print run for this summer, so basically any time now. In this game there is both a basic version and also an advanced version, and they suggest that you only take a look at the advanced version once you've played a couple of games. I'm not entirely sure whether this is necessary. It won't hurt, of course, but the advanced game is certainly the more interesting one, and this is also what I will be showing you. Theme-wise, this is your typical Eurogame. It's set in the 16th century in Italy. Players are nobles who try to collect building materials to build certain buildings in different Italian cities and to impress the king and gain money and prestige. I'll now show you a full 3-player game with the advanced version of this game, and after that I want to talk a little about why this is not your typical Eurogame despite its appearances and what makes it stand above the crowd. Have fun watching. Here you can see the setup for a 3-player game, and as always let's take a brief look at the components. Starting with the board in the middle. First of all, we have a scoring track where everybody starts at 0. We have the usual 50 and 100 points markers. Then on the board you can see the 6 cities or towns where players can build their buildings, and those spaces are required for the scoring. We have a central element which is the wheel where the building blocks are available, and it is seated in a way so that each of one of the 6 different colors starts on this space here. The others are in this bag. Then over here we have the buildings. 9 are laid out randomly, and here is a stack with more. Then we have 6 buildings, 1 of each, which cost 8, and those are available at every time. Over here we have some upgrade markers, and finally on the board we have 1 of each of the 6 different objects which are available for purchase, and the others are in a supply over here. Then we have a supply of money. We have 4 cards that are drawn randomly or chosen. I've actually chosen one of the suggested setups from the advanced rules rulebook, and those basically describe how a player can declare that the game is over, and then how the players can score points, and I'll talk about these in a minute. And finally each of the players has a player board. Let's take a look at the blue ones. The blue one is the starting player. He has 6 different pawns for scoring. On his player board he can score in different ways, either through the cities or through the different types of buildings, or the kind of building, whether they are a city or a country building. And then each player starts with 20 bucks and 1 building block, and since the blue player is the starting player, he starts with the least valuable with a black block, and the red player has a blue block, and the yellow player has a green block. And normally each of the player's possessions would be hidden behind of those screens here, but it's easier for me to just keep them visible. So the game will be over when either all of these buildings are gone. Once one of them is built from here, then it's replaced with one from the stack, and once all buildings are gone from the board and the stack is gone, the game will be over. Or it can be over if one of the players announces the end of the game. Every player can do that once he's fulfilled these 3 conditions. So the first condition is for 3 players that you have to build a certain amount of expensive buildings that cost 5 or more. So basically 5 or 8, since there are no buildings that cost 6 or 7. The next thing is that you have to collect 3 pairs of objects. So for example 2 crowns, 2 arches and 2 flags. And then also each pair of objects will be worth 5 victory points. And then the third condition is a player has to build 2 buildings in 3 different cities. And then again, based on which city it is, those will again score you points. And then there's a last victory point condition, which doesn't have a game end condition, which is basically that 2 different kinds of buildings would be scored. And all of this will get clearer once we go into the game. Then it's blue player's turn, and on your turn you can do one of 3 different things. You can either go to the wheel and buy building materials, or you can build a building, or you can trigger a scoring. While the blue player already has 1 building block and could probably build something with it, he decides to first get new building materials. If you want to get new building materials, you either turn the wheel and then refill it and then buy, or leave the wheel as it is, you don't refill, and then you buy. In this case, the blue player decides to turn the wheel, and then it's refilled in a way that there are 11 building blocks on it, and since we already have 6 here, we need to put on 5 more on the first segment. And we get 2 yellows, 2 whites, and a red one. And now the blue player has to choose one of the 2 segments and buy as many blocks as he likes from there. So he decides to choose this segment here, and the black one doesn't have a price anymore because it started with 1 here, and then all the prices drop by 1, so you can get this one for free, and then you can get the blue one for 1 and the green one for 2. So he gets all these 3 cubes, he puts them in a supply, which would be behind his screen, and he has to pay 3 of his 20 bucks to the bank. Now the red player also decides to buy building blocks. He first turns the wheel, then there are 8 blocks on there, so we need 3 more. White seems very popular. And then he decides to buy all the cubes from this segment for 9. The yellow player decides to build a building. He only has 1 cube, but there are 4 buildings available that only cost 1, and so he decides to take this cathedral. Now, he would have to pay as many cubes as the building costs. He obviously only has the green one, and now he has to decide in which city he wants to build the cathedral. And the thing is that certain cities allow for certain building materials, and as you can see from Luca on topwards, they don't allow the green building blocks for their materials. So basically he can only build, since he's building with a green block, in any of these 3 cities, so he decides to put this cathedral in Viareggio. This one goes back to the bag, and the empty spot is refilled. The blue player also decides to build a building. He takes the other cathedral and decides to put it into Massa, meaning that he can't pay with his black building blocks, but he can use the blue and the green one. And of course we refill the building supply. The red player decides to go buy blocks again, and then he decides to buy 2 yellows and a red one for a total of 8. The yellow player is also buying blocks, and he's deciding to get those 2 for 6. The player is buying, and he's choosing this sector, so he gets this one for free, and the other 2 for a total of 4. Red player, he gets blue one for free, and the others for 3 altogether. The yellow player also buys. I know he's lucky that the red player left him those, so he just pays 2 and gets all these. The blue player decides not to turn the wheel and just take these 2. The black is free and the green one costs 1. The red player is already broke, so he could either just go for the really cheap cubes, but he decides to build something. He has 4 yellow and 1 white cube, so he decides to take this villa for 5 and put it into Pisa and pay all those. And we get a new palazzo, which we can just put here. Basically the order doesn't matter, I'll just try to arrange them that the orders are from the lowest to the highest. The yellow player buys blocks, and he decides to get all of these for 3. Blue player turns, and he decides to buy from here, so he pays nothing and 2. The red player decides to build this villa in Massa, and he pays with 2 blue. The yellow player, and he decides to buy all of these for 4. The blue player decides to build this palazzo, which costs 5 in Lerici, paying 5 black building blocks. And we get another palazzo, this time for 4. The red player buys this villa for 1 red block. The yellow player decides to build this cathedral, also into Viareggio, and he pays with 1 green, 2 red and 1 yellow. And we get a new palazzo for 2. The blue player builds the palazzo in Viareggio for 4. And the red player is still broke, and he only has 2 blocks left. So he decides to call for a scoring. He can't score any of the cities because those would need 2 or even 3 buildings to be present in that city, and he only has 1 or 0. He could score all his country buildings, but they would give him victory points for their building costs, so that would be 8 victory points altogether, but no money. He doesn't have any city buildings which would give him money, so he decides to pick a kind of building, and of course he picks the villa because he only has those. He puts a scoring marker on here, and basically this means he asks the king, because each player is part of the nobility, to come by into all the cities and take a look at the villas. It also means that he can never score the villas again this game. And now let's see. This one had a cost of 2 and is in a city which awards victory points. So the cost is multiplied by this for 2 victory points. Here it's the other way around. Cost of 1 times 2, another 2 points, so we're at 4 points. And then this city gives money, so 5 building costs multiplied by 3 is 15 money, so he's liquid again. And finally, for each building that's scored, he gets the associated object from the supply. So basically, he gets 3 of these shield, coat of arms, crest type of things. Those would also be put behind his shield. And since players are trying to get pairs of objects, he now already has 1.5 pair, because the pairs don't have to be different. If he gets another one of these shields, that's 2 pairs. The yellow player turns the wheel and decides to take 2 blue ones, which are free. Blue player also turns, and then he decides to grab all these for 4, and so does the red player. And he picks those 2 for 3. The yellow player turns, refills 2, and buys all of those for 1. Blue player simply picks this one for free. The red player turns and then takes these 3 cubes for 3. The yellow player takes these 2 for free. The blue player builds a palazzo for 3 into Pisa. The red player can afford a 5 building in Lucca. There are the Biblioteca, the Castello and the Cathedral available. And since the yellow player is going for cathedrals, he decides to take exactly that one. So this one goes into Lucca, pays 5 cubes, or bricks, or blocks, and then we get a 3 villa. The yellow player decides to go for the 8-point cathedral. He puts it into Massa, so he can pay with 4 blues, 3 greens and 1 red. There's nothing to refill, but if you buy one of the 8-point buildings, you get one of these upgrade tiles, and he takes the one for Viareggio. So whenever he scores something that is in Viareggio now, he still gets 2 coins, but also 1 victory point. The blue player is building the 1 palazzo into Livorno. The red player decides to score again, and the others haven't yet. He decides to score Lucca, which is possible because Lucca requires 2 buildings. So he marks Lucca on the main board. Nobody can score Lucca again. So he has 6 points of buildings worth in Lucca, and now of course we look at different kinds of buildings because we're interested in the city. So these are 6 points times 2 is 12 victory points, so he's now at 16, and he gets another one of these crests and also a chalice. So now he has 2 full sets and half of a third set, meaning that he's very close to fulfilling this condition. The yellow player decides to score his cathedrals. First of all, 8 times 1 victory points plus 5 times 1 victory point is 13 victory points. And then 5 times 2 is 10 money. And then he gets 3 of these chalices. So he also has 1.5 sets of objects now. Blue player goes shopping again, and he decides to take these 2 for a total of 1. The red player decides to build the Biblioteca in Massa for a green and a blue one, and we get a Castello. The yellow player turns the wheel, and he decides to take all of these for 6. The blue player decides to take all of these cubes for a total of 5, which means he's broke. The red player, and then takes those 2 for 2. The yellow player also goes shopping, decides to choose this segment, so that's 4, 5. Still 5. The blue player grabs the palazzo and puts it into Lucca, and we get a Castello for 1. The red player turns the wheel, and then he decides to buy these 3 for 5. The yellow player thinks a little bit about what to do next. The thing is, he has this upgraded multiplier in Viareggio, so it would be great if he could score the buildings in there again. He already scored the cathedrals, so that is not an option. If he were to choose to score his city buildings, then he would only get the money and not the victory points, and only one money each and not the objects. So he could try and score Viareggio, but for that he needs a third building. And for scoring purposes, since he scores certain points for each city where he has at least 2 buildings, adding a third building to a city doesn't help him in terms of endgame scoring, and maybe he should more focus on getting another building in Massa or somewhere else. But he thinks he still has the time to do this, so he decides to build in Viareggio. He decides to take this Castello for 4, paying with 2 greens, a yellow and a red. And then we have a Porta for 5. Now the blue player decides to score his Palazzi. Point-wise, that is 1 times 3 plus 2 plus 2, so that's 7. Money-wise, that's 9 plus 8, 17, plus 5, 22. And finally, he gets 5 of the crown objects, basically emptying all the supply at once, meaning he has 1 pair, 2 pair, 2.5 pairs. And then, as an extra action, which you can always do on your turn, he goes to the supply of objects and buys 1 for 10, and that is of course the last crown. So he has his 3 pairs, but the game is of course not over yet. The red player realizes that the yellow player is probably about to score Viareggio, meaning that he would get the last chalice from the supply. And since the red player is also missing one of the chalices, he decides to just score his cathedrals now, which he can do because he has one, and this is the only requirement. You have to have one type of the building. And so this cathedral scores 10 points, so he's now at 26. And more importantly, he gets the last chalice from the supply. The yellow player is not too happy about that, but he still decides to score Viareggio. He has 9 points of building materials in there, so that's 18 money and 9 points. So he's now at 22. And then there aren't any chalices to get, but he still gets 1 flag for his Castello. And then of course, since he has the money now, he could buy the last chalice from supply, but he doesn't think that anyone will do this before he can, so he just decides to wait a little. The blue player builds a Biblioteca into Lerici for 1 black brick. The red player is running short on money again. His best option of getting some is to score Pisa, but for that he needs a second building. He could build a 2 building into Pisa right now, but there's only 1s and 3s. So he decides to wait a little. He thinks he still has the time, because the other players are not terribly close to announcing the end of the game, as far as he judges. So he just decides to turn the wheel, and then he decides to just take the blue one for free. The yellow player simply takes this brick for 2. The blue player turns, refills, and then takes these cubes for 4. The red player takes this one for 2. The yellow player takes the Castello and puts it into Livorno for 5 white bricks. The blue player turns and then buys all of this for 5. The red player builds a Porta into Pisa for 3 yellows. We have a Castello for 2. And now the red player has 3 sets. He has built at least 2 buildings in at least 2 different cities. So all he's missing now to declare the end of the game is a third building that costs 5 or more. The yellow player builds a Porta in Livorno for 1 white. The blue player builds a Castello in Livorno. The red player scores Pisa, so that gives him 8 times 3 is 24 money. The last villa crest and also a Porta. And then he decides to spend 10 money on getting the last villa crest from the supply, completing his 4th set. The yellow player scores Livorno, so he gets 6 times 3, 18 points. So he's now at 40. And then he gets a flag and an arch. And then he decides to spend 10 on getting the last chalice from the common supply. The blue player builds a Castello in Lucca for 2 red. the red player decides to push for the end of the game and hoping he'll still come out ahead. But since the yellow player is also only one building away from declaring the end of the game, he decides that it's better if he does it. He doesn't have enough building materials to build an entirely new building, but, and I haven't told you or shown you this yet, you can also upgrade buildings. He decides to build this porter over this biblioteca, so he only has to pay the difference. That's 3. He can pay them like this, and the biblioteca is removed from the game. First, he pays $10 to get the last arch, completing his 5th set. Then of course we refill, and then everybody can see that he has 3 buildings of cost 5 or more. Everybody can also see that he has built at least 2 buildings in at least 3 cities, and then he lifts his screen to show everybody that he has at least 3 pairs of objects. So he can declare the end of the game, which will give him 5 points. Since the blue player was a starting player, the yellow player still gets his turn, so everybody had an equal amount of turns. And the yellow player decides that for his last action it's probably best to score his Castelli. So this one will give him 15 points, plus another 4 for this one up here. So that's 19 points. So he's now at 59. Then he gets $8. He also gets another 2 flags. So he has at least 4 sets. Okay, so first the objects for each pair, that's 5 victory points. So the yellow player gets 20 points, the red player gets 25 points, and the blue player gets 15. And each object that isn't part of the set simply scores 1 point. So the yellow player gets another point. Then, for each city where there are at least 2 buildings, the players score points according to this table. So the yellow player has fulfilled that in Viareggio and Livorno. Livorno is 11, Viareggio is 5, so that's 16. For the red player it's Pisa, Lucca and Massa, so that's 9, 16, 19. And for blue it's Livorno, Lucca and Lerici, so that's 18, also 19. And then each player is able to score 2 types of buildings again to get money and victory points. The yellow player, of course, takes his castellos again, so that's another 19 victory points and 8 money. And then of course he takes his cathedrals, 13 points and another 10 money. Red takes villas first, so that's another 4 points and 15 money. And then portas, so that's 5 points and 9 money. Blue takes his palazzi, that's 7 points and 22 money. And then his castelli, so that's another 7 points. And then finally 5 money is another point, so that's 7 points for yellow, 5 for red and 5 for blue. And then final scores are 135 for yellow, 89 for red and 60 for blue. So I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough of the Palaces of Carrara. Even though the endgame scores were a little bit lopsided, to say the least, I guess it's a good thing that I always stress that I don't want to teach you the strategy in these videos, because the strategic play wasn't too great for at least one of the players here. I guess that's what I get for trying to play 3 players at once. But anyway, I hope nevertheless that you could see how the game plays. I mean, it's not a complicated game. You only have a certain amount of actions, and the complexity is basically to decide when to take which action, but also the pacing is very important. It depends on when one player rushes ahead and tries to get these conditions fulfilled so he can declare the end of the game. So basically, if everybody is taking the leisurely time, everybody can do more scoring, more building, making sure that when they score, they take the maximum out of it. So basically, if you want to score a city, maybe just build another building in it, because then you get more, but do you have the time to do this? So this is one thing that I really like. And the other thing is the sheer variability and replayability because of these cards. Let me actually show you what I mean. So these are the cards that were used in the game that I just showed you. But for example, it could have also been scoring 3 cities, collecting different kinds of objects, and you need at least 4 different objects to end the game, and then depending on how many different sets of different objects you have, you'll be awarded points for that. Having built 1 building that cost 8, and scoring the smallest building of each kind. Or it could have been having a certain amount of money, in this case 25, collecting a certain amount of objects, and then each object just scores. Having built buildings that are worth a certain amount of building points, and then basically your victory points are just those building points, and scoring 2 different cities, in this case Livorno and Lerici again. And there are many, many more of these cards. Okay, that's basically it. I hope by now you have a very good idea how this game plays, the decisions that you have to take in it, and also whether this is something that might be of interest to you. Then I thank you for watching, and until next time, bye bye.